This is Pat Mesiti, and it is 5 p.m. Sydney and Melbourne in Dictator Dan's prison camp, and it's 4 p.m. up here in the penal colony of Queensland. And if I'm sounding a little bit cynical, it's probably because we've got reasons to be cynical, folks. And, you know, I really believe that we need to be told the truth. Great teacher said that you shall know, not hear, know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. I want to make a couple of statements today before I introduce our very, very special guest, who I believe to be one of the most brilliant minds in journalism in Australia, and someone who's not scared to stand up to the bureaucracy, to the political agendas, to, well, let's be quite frank, to the lies that have been peddling. And I want to say this. If you start with the wrong premise, you will come to the wrong conclusion for every right reason. In other words, it's a bit like, don't confuse me about the facts, I've already made up my mind. So people don't like things to be questioned. And they certainly don't like the science to be questioned. It's funny how the science that is questioned almost goes out of its way to deplatform, silence, vilify, suppress other narratives. Now, has science always been right? Please answer that for me. The answer is no. Let me give you one example where the science was wrong. The science in the day of Christopher Columbus believed in the flat earth theory, that the earth was flat and if you went along a certain line, you'd fall off. Oh, but Pat, we've gone beyond that. Have we really? Or is there science that is drip-fed to us according to a narrative, and if you dare challenge that narrative, you then have to pay the consequences? Why the deplatforming of and silencing of doctors that have a different narrative? These people that are dealing in therapeutics. Why secret meetings, secret agendas that you're going to hear about today, not from conspiracy theories, but from facts. And the facts are, and the truth is. The facts are, and the truth is. With that in mind, I'm going to ask a very special guest who, by the way, had a very difficult time producing this difficult piece, even in her own ranks. So it's coming to us hot off the press. This is going to be a paint peeler, and a lovely lady, a brilliant mind, great writer, Alexandra Marshall. How are you, Alexandra? How are you, Ellie?
I am very well, thank you.
It's always a privilege to have you on, and my viewers absolutely love you. Now, why was there such a challenge putting together this article where you wrote, "Liberty is a mental illness, ? Why the difficulty in that?
Yeah, so every now and then you stumble across topics that even within your own peer group, you can have a lot of trouble pushing through. And I have noticed lately that there are still layers of protection sitting around the scientific research area. So it doesn't seem to matter how many times things like peer review are pulled apart as being a little bit dodgy. There are still people who are protecting the old idea that these scientific academic industries have some honor and some prestige. Now, we're a long way from the olden days where everything that used to get through this peer review process was rigorously tested and verified. And even then, stuff was wrong. It doesn't mean it's right, but at least there was a stronger process in review. These days, we are learning that what passes for academic research is more often than not crap. And that wouldn't matter so much, except that this academic research, that's rubbish, is being used to draft policy that is fundamentally changing Australian life and our legal systems.
You know, one of the things, I want to get to the article in a second, but one of the things that amazed me is how government, state and federal, were talking about the Doherty Institute report and modelling. Has anyone ever seen that document and the absolute dribble, misinformation and modelling that was totally wrong? Would you agree with that, Ellie?
Well, I haven't seen it, obviously, because very few people have, but what I can tell you is as an AI database designer, I can tell you that modeling is extremely dependent on the ability to correctly replicate the environment that's being modeled. So if it's an extremely simple environment, like what I used to do, which is a retail system where you know and can control the variables, then modeling is great. It's still not perfect, but it's great. If you're trying to model something as complicated as an ecosystem or a weather system or even a viral outbreak, you cannot feed the required information and variables into a computer system to give it even half a chance of producing meaningful results, which is why all of this complex modeling is, by and large, worse than informed guesswork, because humans seem to be better able at judging things like an outbreak spread than a computer at this point in time.
I suppose I'm speaking about the modelling that, I'll give you an example. The former Premier of New South Wales, October is going to be our worst month according to this report. Well, it was actually one of the lowest. And then, of course, the media with their whole, we're going to be filling football stadiums based on the modelling was so wrong. But anyway, Alexandra, let me ask you, these faceless entities, as you put it, building our cages, who are they? Why are they doing it? And why is the government allowing it?
Well, people produce research for a lot of different reasons. At the moment, we are seeing both in climate change and COVID, an awful lot of academic research done basically because it's lucrative. You get paid for it, and if you manage to say the right thing, then you can become sort of academically famous. It's a little bit like social media, but for academics. And so instead of the normal situation where research groups are doing things based upon purely their own interest or merit, we have a situation where a whole stack of other people are mixed in with the group, producing studies that would never normally pass or be approved, but are getting through because there's such an appetite for the information. And governments are making it worse by asking for a certain outcome and actively looking for research that supports an outcome rather than taking on board real outcomes and adjusting their policy accordingly. And so we can go through some examples of how destructive that process is. But what I wanted to say is that science doesn't have an opinion. It is just the inquiry into the fundamental laws and functions of our world. But what it is a weapon in the hands of the wrong people who seek to use science for their own ends. And we've seen it many times in history, whether it's religious groups or leaders, kings, socialist dictatorships, or even these woke millennials. It doesn't matter. All these different groups misuse science for their own purpose, trying to justify their actions using a trusted system, which is science.
You mentioned in your article, by the way, brilliantly written, and you just are a wordsmith. I'll tell you, as I say, a great vacation for me would be a couple of weeks inside your mind and your writing mind. But I want to quote this article because I want everyone to read it. It's brilliant. To keep the science behind COVID health orders a secret, the Prime Minister tabled legislation to bury National Cabinet's machinations forever. Why would the Prime Minister and the National Cabinet want to keep secrets from the people that they're enslaving?
So what we're talking about is the Prime Minister set up National Cabinet to basically absolve himself with the responsibility that is his by law, which is the pandemic response. He is legally responsible for all of the states' pandemic response, but via National Cabinet, he was able to allow the states to take on that political risk. But in order to do that, he set up the National Cabinet as if it were a committee of cabinet and therefore falling under the protection of cabinet secrecy laws. But what happened was it was ruled that it wasn't a real committee of cabinet and therefore not under the jurisdiction of secrecy laws. And it was ruled in court that the Prime Minister would have to release all of the advice that went into the construction of the nation's health orders, which includes all of the states.
Wow.
Now That panicked the Prime Minister and the health officials and all of our premiers. You know, if they had faith in their science and they trusted their science and they were proud of their science, then they wouldn't have a problem with revealing the work that went into their health mandates. In fact, they should be actively presenting that to the public. Instead, the Prime Minister, instead of obeying the law, he went ahead and had Alan Tudge table the COAG Legislation Amendment Bill 2021 to bury the secrets of National Cabinet more deeply than the secrets of the World War. So they're basically saying that these secrets from the health orders are more dangerous to public opinion than the behaviour of the government during the war, which is an astonishing opinion to take. And Taj had the hide to say upon doing this that the bill ushers in a new and exciting era for our federation. But one might argue that's a federation of secrecy. And they're not the only ones. Daniel Andrews down in Victoria ended up coming awry with a similar ruling by the court saying that they have to release the details of their secret meetings and 100+ pages of advice, which he is also fighting.
Why are they scared for people to see this? It boggles my mind. Why the secrecy rather than transparency? And why would the Prime Minister of this country, with his national henchmen, I don't call them national cabinet, why would they do this to the people that they serve? Why, in your opinion?
You call me a wordsmith, but I get pretty blunt at the top of the article and suggest that the only logical explanation for why they would go to so much trouble to hide the advice and the science is because the science is shit. And forgive my bluntness, but that is probably the best summary to explain their behaviour. So what we have, we can't see their science yet, but we are seeing bits and pieces leak through for us to observe. And so there was a great big controversy either last week or the week before when it was revealed that Victoria's mask mandate was based almost solely on a single study by the Burnett Institute, which amounted to essentially researchers trawling through archives at the Age newspaper and looking at the photographs journalists took for their reports, which is, of course, not a valid scientific study. You would not be able to submit that into a high school level paper, let alone into policy building legislation. So, and even when the Burnett Institute was very upset when this came out and all the criticism they copped for it. And they tried to say that it was unfair to call it crap, which is what one of the people examining it said it was. But in truth, it was. And that's why they were being mocked and ridiculed. And they give advice to New South Wales as well. So it's not just a Victorian problem. But what you might have noticed happened as well at a similar time is that the Victorian president of the Australian Medical Association came out with this astonishing statement that the people who have decided not to be vaccinated should withdraw themselves voluntarily from the medical system and allow nature to take its course if they were to catch COVID, suggesting that just because you don't agree with trialling a vaccine that has no historical safety records, you therefore don't want to access any other taxpayer-funded medical help, which is an extremely immoral and unethical position for the AMA president of Victoria to take. And so people have started to side-eye these medical professions and think to themselves, well, that's a bit worrying. And they're not the only ones. A lot of doctors have been on social media in official positions saying similar disturbing things. But what I wanted to really, what gave me pause was not an Australian story. It was a story out of the UK Telegraph. And forgive me, I will read a small section.
No, please, it was brilliant. Please do.
Yeah, so there was a group over in the UK called the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Behaviour. Now, they are an extremely important group as far as crafting government policy in the UK. And they admitted to deliberately lying and manufacturing science in order to use fear to help coerce people into government policy. And because they were finding that the general population did not feel sufficiently threatened by COVID. So this was their response to lie, essentially.
Wow.
And so the quote from the UK Telegraph, which I think is worth hearing if your audience haven't heard it, says the UK government was very worried about compliance and they thought people wouldn't want to be locked down. There were discussions about fear being needed to encourage compliance, and decisions were made about how to ramp up the fear. The way we have used fear is dystopian. The use of fear has definitely been ethically questionable. It's been like a weird experiment. Ultimately, it backfired because people became too scared. So this is
Wow.
extraordinary to have scientists admitting to using fear on behalf of the government.
This is, in your words, weaponized fear for compliance. So this moves away from the area of public health into almost a state of creating mental health in people. Wouldn't you agree, Alexandra? I mean, what they're doing?
Yes, well, there's a fabulous quote from the sadly departed Michael Crichton, where he talks about how fear is used by governments, especially in the realms of science, to create a pandemic of fear of its own, where you can actually make people sick by making them afraid, even if there's actually nothing to be afraid of. And I recommend that anybody if you Google Michael Crichton State of Fear on YouTube, you'll get his fabulous speech. And it tears apart both the global warming saga and is applicable to the pandemic. I highly recommend it.
Alexandra, I want to quote you because you said it so well. And I know you've got an answer. Who are these freaking geniuses who come up with this dribble and decide to peddle fear to the people? And my question is, why? What's the agenda here?
So the government, who are ultimately responsible for this cycle of fear that's going on in academia, they had a lot of trouble convincing people that they live in an apocalypse. You saw them try it with climate change and how, generally speaking, they got a few kids to go along through propaganda from their teachers continuously telling them they're going to die. But adults were dragging kids off trains and just wanting to go to work. The working class wasn't interested in this campaign of existential fear. And so what they started doing in the climate change science, the IPCC, was paying for studies that promoted fear, that deliberately went out and tried to manipulate, they call it homogenizing, but it's basically rewriting the historical record to make people afraid of something that isn't there. Now, that habit wasn't just incentivized with money. They started to punish scientists who refused to go along with it by excluding them from grants, firing them from their jobs, and basically exercising them from the entire scientific community. So science is meant to be about challenging information and being unafraid to test theories, and no scientific theory should be frightened of a challenge, no matter how ridiculous, because the truth will always stand correct. But these climate change science and COVID science has been using social media giants to censor any and all dissent, to stop anybody challenging what is being put out. Now, that is not scientific. That is a sure sign that they are not confident in their own science. So as far as who these people are, there are always dodgy people in any profession. And once you start incentivizing this dodgy behavior with money, you're going to attract even more into the party. And if you start excluding the good scientists, well, they're just going to leave. So you're going to end up with what we have today, which is pseudoscience at best, propaganda at worst.
Do you know, when I look at the statistics of suicide and mental health, and then look at the likes of Dominic Perrottet, who so far not too bad.
Don't even get me started. He came out this morning and pushed back the December 1st opening to December 15. I've got a nephew who just signed a lease, who cannot afford his rent for the next 2 weeks because he was supposed to have employment. I've got one of my other cousins, he can't get a house because the real estate agent is denying access to the unvaccinated. It is disgusting. I have to go and stand outside a shop tomorrow and beg someone to go into the store for me because I'm not allowed in places like Kmart, which are previously. Yes, he's pushed it back this
the
morning.
opening day?
Yes, and there were disgusting comments from the Health Minister, Brad Hazzard, who treated us. He was saying things like, don't wait around for alternative vaccinations, which by that he means Novavax, basically insinuating that they weren't going to let them into the state. He just wanted everyone to have Pfizer, while Stuart Ayres was saying that your freedoms will be dependent on booster shots, and that if you want to keep your freedom, you will have to subscribe to the state's permanent booster shot. It was a horrific press conference.
I was unaware of that, and so honestly, if Dominic, if you want to lose, keep going down that road. You want to irritate me, keep going down that road. I've got a daughter in Sydney that I can't see, and Dominic, I'm going to load my gun, and we're going to be talking, and I'm going to be talking to some of your friends as well. I'm just letting you know ahead of time because I know some of your friends watch this program. So he's pushed back the date from the 1st, just so I'm clear on it, Alexandra, from the 1st to the 15th. Is that correct?
Yes, or 95%, whichever comes first, up from 90%, which was meant to be our release date, which is also up from 80%, which was our previous promise. So he's basically saying you have no choice. We won't let you out unless you get vaccinated. And that is coercion. It is against the law. It is against the Australian Immunisation Handbook. It's also unethical. You know, it's just morally reprehensible. And his justification for it was because there have been outbreaks among the fully vaccinated, I might add. He's decided that in order to give people who are vaccinated extra freedoms, he has to punish those who are unvaccinated and hold them in for longer. It was horrible.
Dominic, I'm going to be talking to some of your friends tomorrow. And if you want to have your power short-lived, you're doing a damn good job, Dominic. So again, politicians lying. I guess they've learned from the top, haven't they, Alexandra?
Yes, as I have said in my article, that Prime Minister Scott Morrison has full legal authority. He swore that vaccines would not be mandatory in Australia and are currently not mandatory. That is a lie. He oversees National Cabinet. He knows full well that various state premiers have made vaccination a mandatory condition of employment and of participation in society. So for like Victoria, for instance, you pretty much cannot earn a living and will be forced onto the streets unless you get a vaccination. That is a mandatory vaccination, whether it is in name or not, that is what it is. And it's disingenuous and unethical to pretend that that isn't happening.
I wonder if Sky News, who's supposed to be a fairly independent channel, I wonder if they conducted a news poll, because obviously the others won't, that would ask people, would you have been jabbed, vaxxed, if you weren't under coercion, loss of job, bribe, threat? What do you think would happen, Alexandra? What percentage of people would say, absolutely not, in your opinion? I think half the population wouldn't have done it, if not more. But what's your view?
We don't even need to guess, because if you follow the vaccination statistics, we got to 20% pretty quick, just without any coercion. 20% took it up. Then when they locked down everybody and told them that, oh, if you get vaccinated, we'll unlock you, it jumped to 40%. So we know that 20% seem to be with no coercion, 40% seem to be with just a little bit of, oh, we're going to keep you locked down in general. But when they started to say, you're going to have to get vaccinated or you won't be able to work, you won't be able to feed your children, your kids can't go to school, you know, that's when they started to get to full coercion. That is when vaccination levels rose rapidly. And it was on the back of an ultimatum issued by the Premier and a threat issued by the Premier. So we know what those statistics are.
I think Scott has become a transitional Prime Minister. I mean, I just got a photo sent to me before the broadcast of the I can't believe this, of the 400 jets that these leaders are using to fly to Glasgow. Alexandra, am I missing something here? These guys are at a climate change conference and they got these 400 jets. 400! And yet Mr. Morrison holds up a piece of coal and says that we can't live on 45% net emissions and it'll break the country. Why do you think he has a problem in dealing in reality and truth? I'm a bit confused.
It's hypocrisy, plain and simple, and it seems to be a condition of the political and mega corporate class where they can't help themselves. But
Mm.
I think we should get to the point of the whole article because people might be asking why I called it "Liberty is a Mental Illness?" question mark.
Mm.
And did you have any comments on that before I start?
I just got comments on stuff like that a few minutes ago, and yeah. So, but I haven't seen any news today. I've been planning our live event, so I haven't got to any news. I haven't seen. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the reason I called it Liberty is a Mental Illness is because there was one Australian study that was done by the School of Psychology at the University of Sydney, and I found this. It hasn't been in the press anywhere else. I dug it up by accident when I was researching the different pandemic responses from other pandemics, which they all got wrong, by the way. The scientists are repeating the same mistakes with every pandemic. Anyway, this study was called To Comply or Not to Comply, a latent profile analysis of behaviors and attitudes during the COVID-19 pandemic. And basically, it broke society down into compliance and non-compliance, those who agreed with COVID health orders and those who resisted them. And it made some pretty concerning commentary about the people who choose not to comply with health orders, basically associating freedom and liberty with mental illness or depraved behavior. So we have things like them saying that, a loose culture, and they mean loose in a derogatory fashion, is characterized by valuing freedom. They also tried to say that non-compliance, which would be, me and you and most of our audience, that we express support for freedom tended to be extroverts or of lower agreeableness and intellect, that we exhibited amoral ideology, and that we used maladaptive coping strategies like going to work or watching TV, to deal with the isolation of a lockdown, right? They found that we were more likely to leave home to care for somebody else or to go to work. And you're like, yeah, that doesn't sound like a bad human being to me. Or, this is the bit they really didn't like, that we were expressing and exercising our right to freedom, which they thought was fundamentally dangerous. And what they couldn't work out, which amused me, and it's the back end of the paper that I wrote, was how they couldn't make sense or find any patterns in the type of people who were resisting COVID health orders. And that's because they started with the assumption, these idiots, that resisting was wrong and that the health orders were right. So because they started with that, they could not understand or find a pattern in behavior of resistance. And so it just shows you how it just rubbish, this work that goes into it. But what I didn't like is universities endorsing content that suggests freedom is mentally deficient and morally wrong. Now that's a shift toward a socialist ideology, and that's what we have to be worried about, which is why I flagged it.
I just want to say a word to everyone out there. I want to ask Alexandra a couple of questions. I want you to hear me, number one, from someone who's struggled for many years with anxiety and depression and mental health. And to those of you that out there who have been vilified, coerced, bullied, I mean, I experienced some of that at the pharmacy the other day, and I'm an ex-street guy, so I don't back down. I experienced it at a gym with one person who was trying to bully someone at a gym where I was. And again, I'm not one to back down. I'm not after an argument. I certainly don't. I try to avoid them. But I want to speak to everyone, and I want you all to hear this. I did a rant this morning, which would be good for you to go and have a listen to. Those of you that are the non-compliant, those of you that are made to feel like you're doing something wrong, those of you that are made to feel guilty because you haven't carried your weight, I want to say something to you to the heart. I want you to hear me what I'm about to say. You are not a problem to be fixed. You are not a problem to be fixed. You are a wonderful human being standing up for your rights, and these idiots who profess to be wise are nothing but fools. Having a degree, to me, doesn't add up to diddly squat. Let me be quite frank, and I mean no disrespect to the educated. People with degrees work for me, a high school, basically, dropout. Degrees to me, you can have more degrees than a thermometer. It doesn't mean you're smart. And what Alexandra is saying here is these people might have degrees, nothing wrong with them. But for them to make people like you feel like there's something wrong with you, you're working, you desire for work, that's wrong. Where do we get this from? This is nothing but pure. And as I've said before, this is no longer about, rights and wrongs or freedom of freedom. This is good versus evil. For people to be alienated from their families, cut off from their jobs, banned from places of worship. I mean, when dictators like Dictator Dan can go out and pass laws and basically wipe out any power of the people in government, that is called evil. Socialism is communist with lipstick on. That's it. Alexandra, let me ask you a couple of questions. I've vented now, so I get that off my chest. But
before we move on to the next topic, can I just say that
yes,
science has always been in the habit of gatekeeping. Now, that's not a criticism of science as a concept, but things like the Royal Society that exist around science, so this is the power structures, have always been resistant to those who challenge the status quo, whether they are respected scientists who had histories and suddenly came up with an idea they didn't like, or in particular the work and research of laymen who discovered truths through their own honest observation, even if they weren't qualified scientists. They actually contributed some of the greatest advancements to science that there is. Now, we have the exact same problem today where if you don't hold the right qualifications, if you don't come from the right institutions, and if you don't have the right profile, well, then you are dismissed offhand, regardless of the quality of your work or the quality of your ideas. And that is the same mistake being repeated over and over again, and that is not scientific. It is not meant to be a gatekeeping system. It is meant to be an exploration of ideas, regardless of who comes up with them.
Alexandra, you make an interesting statement in your article. We'll tell people where to get it in a second. It says, the researchers struggled to make sense of their data. Now, you would think researchers would be proficient at making sense of their data, wouldn't you? Why couldn't they make sense of the data?
Well, let's start with the fact that the data was a self-survey of which none of the answers, for example, the medical answers, were verified at all by the scientists involved or the researchers involved. So basically, they asked about 100 and something people to answer questions, and from that, they gained this body of information, which they then tried to decipher. So one of the reasons they couldn't make sense of it was because they didn't have enough data to form patterns to begin with, even if they'd asked the right questions. The second thing is they asked the wrong questions. If you look there, when they judge intelligence, they basically use junior school math problems to decide if you were smart or not, which is, not exactly an IQ test if you're going to use it as such a fundamental piece of your logic. And the second is their report was filled with assumptions that they made that dramatically affect the results they're trying to find. So as I said before, they assumed that their position of health orders were right. So if you don't allow for natural responses, they couldn't explain the mental patterns that went into people resisting it when they start with the assumption that resistance is wrong. And that's a basic logic analysis that you normally get taught even in high school to think this way. But we've got a whole bunch of researchers who just stare at data without putting that data in a proper context in order to understand the data they're looking at. So these guys had no hope. That's why these studies are so bad. They don't have any logic to them existing in the first place. But I would like to give a little recommendation to your audience, and that is this book called Trials of the State by Jonathan Sumption. And if you're going to start talking about law, and he's writing a lot about the pandemic, but just the overreach of law and what law is meant to be, I just highly recommend you read it. It's also available for download free on the BBC as an audiobook. It is one of the best groundwork pieces for people trying to understand the system that they live in.
Could you just show that again? Otherwise, I'm going to get slammed with people asking me. Now, guys, go and get a piece of paper. Trials of the State by Jonathan Sumption, okay? Trials of the State by Jonathan Sumption. Because I know what's going to happen. As soon as this goes off, Telegram and everything. What was that book again? Alexandra, I want to ask you a last question. And I know you're busy, but I just love having you on the show. COVID researchers seem to have stopped at telling the truth. Why have they stopped? And why are they so committed in finding ways to incarcerate people? Why?
Well, those last couple of lines of the essay that I wrote are what got me into trouble. Because I basically insinuated that...
Wait a minute. Why would that get you in trouble where it's a flashing, I mean, it's a flashing blind light of the obvious? I mean,
Well,
sorry, I interrupted you, but why would you get in trouble for truth?
So let me read out what it actually says. I said, COVID researchers have stopped investigating the truth and started helping the government find ways to expand the levels of propaganda that dominate our lives. If the end goal is compliance instead of science, no amount of logic will suffice. And so my point here is basically that the research is being done with the view to uphold the government's medical health orders, not to discover whether those health orders are based in science. And I didn't write about it in here, but I did watch quite a few of the court cases that revolved around people fighting fines or testing the validity of the laws that were put out. And the ones in Victoria, for instance, when the scientists were put on the stand under oath, they admitted that there was no health risk difference between going and getting a cup of coffee or buying alcohol at the liquor store or standing on your own holding a protest sign. Instead, what their laws were about and their health orders were what they could get away with to restrict the movement of citizens. Now, that is not the same thing as health orders for general safety. And other things like, for instance, one of the scientists down there who was a health advisor, she had up on her own Twitter account in the height of the 2021 February pandemic, supporting the Black Lives Matter protests because their cause was more important than the health issue. But when it came to talking about whether or not the freedom protest should be allowed to go ahead, she said that no, it was too much of a health risk, but yet she admitted that there was no difference between the two except the ideological basis of the rallies. Now, this is the kind of thing that when it comes out, it invalidates the argument that this is all about health and all about science. Correct. It seems to be at least partly about ideology.
Correct. Alexandra, you are a national treasure, and I love our chats. And I tell you what, the day James mentioned you to me was one great day. And I want to thank you for everything you're doing. And I want to get behind that book of yours when it's ready. And I think you've got a Wikipedia there. Now, where can we find you? For those people that want to find you, want to follow you, please tell us where we can find you.
I've got a Wikipedia? That would really concern me if that's true.
Your book is big like Wikipedia. There's so much information.
Oh, right. Wow, I was really worried for a second there that I had a Wikipedia page set up because it could only be full of rubbish.
You're just a national treasure of knowledge, and this book is like, so like Wikipedia.
Don't scare me. Okay, so before I tell you where you can find me, I want to advertise the piece I've just released this afternoon. Yes, I'm about to promote it. It nearly killed me. So I have done, as I was asked by many followers here and on my blog, to do a full rundown of the digital identity legislation. So that is what is coming out this afternoon. It includes how the government has deliberately drawn in the World Economic Forum digital identity legislation into our own legislation as part of a global digital identity project. So those who are interested in our future and the future of digital identity might want to check that one out. It involved so much work because the bureaucracies just print way too much content. So I've got it summarized for you so that you don't have to read all of that thousands of pages. You can find me mostly on Twitter, which is just @EllieMelly. I've got my blog, which is linked at the top of my Twitter account, just elliemelly.blog. You can find me at my Facebook page, which is Alexandra Marshall. I'm on Instagram. Sometimes I don't really take many selfies, but I am there. And if you want to support my work, you can contribute to my Ko-fi account. I am an independent writer, so I live off your generosity, of your kind viewers. And I've also got a weekly newsletter that I send out now in case you want to just follow the articles and the interviews.
Ellie, if you can send me a link to that, to where people can support you financially into those, I will make sure it goes in my social media sites. I really believe we need to get behind. Can I encourage every one of you? Get behind Ellie. Support her work through prayer, support her work financially, because she's out there fighting in the trenches. Look, I cannot do what Ellie does, and neither can you. So we've got to get behind her. Ellie, thank you so much for your time. Always great to get in. And I'm looking forward to this new article, loading up the gun. We've got to get you back again. And when we do our next prayer and pushback, get you back on that and hopefully get you back before Christmas. But thank you. And I've got some exciting announcements to make in a minute. So everyone give a big thank you to Ellie. Great to have you on, Ellie. And always great to hear what's happening and just such a fresh perspective and a very intelligent and insightful perspective. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me on.
You're welcome. All right, guys, I've got some exciting news. Pray and pulling down strongholds, the Great Southland rallies in person. I have dates. I have venues locked in. And I'm going to bring them up on the screen. Firstly, we are going to be in South Australia, MOPHETT, VALE. And these are facilities we're using, November 14 and 15 at Harvest Church in MOPHETT, VALE, 130 States Road, MOPHETT, VALE, South Australia. Call the church 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Then November 21 and 22, BEAUDESERT at Harvest Point, 25 Walker Road, Gleneagle. Let's get people from all over that area and beyond to join us. We're going to be there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday morning, special leaders and community leaders meeting, and also Monday night. So that's Sunday morning, evening, Monday morning, evening, live and in person. I haven't met some of you. And then the week after that, we are going to the north side of Brisbane, November 28, 29, that's Sunday morning, Sunday night, at 32 CARSELDINE Road, Bridgeman Downs, and that's at Victory Church with Pastor Juan Miller. Listen, even if you're not a church goer, we want you there. This is not a churchy meeting. This is there to pray for the nation, believe. I'm going to share, I'm going to talk. I've even got a music team coming in that's going to be with us. Not a concert, but to uplift you. We've been living in so much fear. We need to get some faith and inspired. And I've got some very special VIP guests that I will release that are going to help people really get their mindset right, get their thinking right. So we're going to Adelaide first, BEAUDESERT, then Bridgeman Downs, and then my backyard, the Gold Coast. We are going to the Gold Coast December 5th and 6th. I just met with the minister at the Reach Out. Again, Steve Ryder, we're going to be at the Reach Out Centre there at Gooding Drive. Okay, Reach Out for Christ Auditorium. We'll be there from the Sunday night, Monday morning, Monday night, and we're going to be there. I think it's about 6 p.m. on. Don't quote me on that. We're working on our website, which should be ready in 3 or 4 days, to have every bit of information there, and it's free admission. Listen, it doesn't get any better than free. November 14th and 15th, Harvest Church, MOPHETT, VALE, 130 States Road, MOPHETT, VALE, South Australia. Then November 21, 22, BEAUDESERT, Harvest Point at Church Auditorium, 25 Walker Road, Gleneagle. And then we're going north side of Brisbane, 28, 29, Victory Church. A lot of churches joining in, a lot of community people, a lot of people out there that think the same as we do going to be with us. And then the final one, December 5th and 6th on the Gold Coast at the Reach Out for Christ Auditorium in Gooding Drive. Be there again, free admission, free admission. You don't need to register. It would be good if you let me know that you're going to be attending, because we want to look after you. Please invite your friends. You don't have to be Christian or religious or whatever. This is going to be a powerful meeting live in person. We want to help our nation get back on track. And if you all know me, you know I shoot from the hip. And I'm going to be telling the truth, and we're going to do it live and in person. And as soon as New South Wales opens up, we're going to go down there, Victoria. We're going to go around the nation, but we're starting in Adelaide, then we're going to Beaudesert, as I said, then we're going to north side of Brisbane, and then finally on the Gold Coast. Can you do me a favor? Could you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel? Can you please share these messages? Listen, the sharing is vital. Don't wait for someone else to share it. We get thousands of views. What I would like to see is every one of you just share it with 1 or 2 people. It's amazing where these messages end up. Please don't just go talking to those that are already on board and on site. Share it. Don't assume people are sharing it. Take responsibility. We really want to empower people. This dissertation interview that we've had with Alexandra is world class. Don't keep it to yourself. Don't hide your light under a bushel. What's been done in secrecy needs to be shouted from the rooftops. So to every one of you, thank you for joining us today. We'll be back here on Thursday with some more updates. And boy, I tell you what, I'm fired up about what's happening in New South Wales. I'm not going to let that one lie down. We're going to come out swinging on that one, and about Victoria, because many of us have gone after Dan. But just remember, there's 3 people, including the Reason Party and the Greens and the other one out there, that are holding the balance of power. They're the ones that are letting Dictator Dan get this stuff over the line. And it's time we put pressure on them, or guess what? We can vote them out. Lobby them, write to them, tell them what we're doing. We're not going to be secret. We want you to know that Goliath's head's going to get chopped off. So thank you everyone for listening. Please share, like and subscribe. You know what to do with these messages. God bless you. And thanks to the guys at Dan Good Productions for helping us stream these. They're a great organization. If you need any streaming, go to these guys. They're outstanding. Thanks to Ben and James and the whole team there as well. God bless you, everyone.